You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. In a world where burnout is almost a badge of honor, can we step out of the hustle and find our happiness and well-being? Tune in today for more. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we tackle the widespread issue of burnout and explore innovative strategies to overcome it. We uncover some of the lesser-known causes of chronic stress and exhaustion that many face in today's fast-paced world. Dr. Zarya Rubin is a Harvard-educated functional medicine physician, TEDx speaker, and burnout expert. She helps passionate, high-achieving women get to the root cause of chronic symptoms and stress so that they can heal from the inside out and truly thrive. She is the founder and CEO of Dr. Zarya, a boutique functional medicine practice in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Rubin studied neurology at McGill University and the renowned Neurological Institute at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. She received her integrative nutrition training at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, studying with Dr. Andrew Weil, Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Deepak Chopra, and other leading influencers in the world of holistic health, and went on to complete advanced functional medicine training at the School of Applied Functional Medicine. She lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband, 10-year-old daughter, and miniature poodle puppy. Let's meet Dr. Zarya Rubin. Hi, Dr. Zarya. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because how to outsmart burnout is such a relevant topic for today's conversation, and I really look forward to speaking with you. So thank you for being here today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Yeah, I feel like this is a topic that could almost span multiple episodes. So I hope that we're going to get the juicy bits into the part of what we record today. And so relevant. Yeah,
I'll provide all the juice. And if I need to come back, I'm happy to do that too.
That sounds fantastic. Now, would you like to start us off with a little bit about your own story? And I feel like there's always a personal bit in there when we are passionate or we follow a certain career path and we end up in a place where we're helping and supporting people about something that really matters to us. So a little bit about your story and where you've come from, what you've been through, and how that brought you to what you do today.
Sure. How much time do we have now? Yeah, obviously, they say do what you know. And I definitely know burnout because I have a lot of firsthand personal experience with it. And I think it really started back when I was training to be a physician. I had gone through so many years of education and training that, I sort of didn't even lift my head up from the books of 4 years of pre-med, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency, and I was in a 2-year fellowship at this point when I realized that I was probably extremely burnt out. I didn't realize it at the time. I think the interesting thing about burnout is that oftentimes we don't recognize it and we make excuses for it. Like, well, I'm just tired, or I'm just stressed, or my job is just really demanding, or this is a tough phase with my kid or my relationship. I think it can be very difficult to recognize, and it kind of sneaks up on you. And if you're not careful, it can really take a toll on your physical and mental health if you don't know how to recognize the signs and symptoms. And I think we're going to get to that. But so I was, absolutely miserable being a physician. And I just thought that was all part of, the job. But then I looked around and I saw my colleagues and they seemed to be doing okay. They seemed to be fine. And I was like, I could barely get to work every morning. I was extremely stressed. I couldn't sleep. I was having anxiety attacks and palpitations and just didn't really put two and two together. And I just didn't see a way out or a way to change that. It was just, well, I guess this is my life now. This is what I've signed on for. This must be what being, a doctor is like and being an adult. And I guess it's pretty miserable. And I just didn't see my way out of it. Unfortunately, it took an extreme form of a wake-up call to snap me out of it. And one night, my best friend from medical school called to tell me that her husband, who was my age, we were, in our 30s and young, healthy, was playing frisbee. He collapsed and they took him to the hospital and they tried to resuscitate him. And I sort of said, well, yeah, he's okay, right? And she said, no, he actually didn't make it. And I think I might maybe drop the phone at that point, and that incredible sense of shock and grief and just disbelief that this could happen. And pretty much in an instant, I realized, yeah, I can't continue like this. Like, if this is all there is, like, I felt immediately my own mortality. When you're young, you sort of think you have forever and you can be miserable in your job. And one day, maybe you'll be happy. I would always think about like, well, one day when I retire, and I was literally thinking about retirement. And I just realized like, this is literally insane. This now is really what we have. And I needed to drastically change my life. I just didn't really know how. And the process of, I had been a doctor for so long. I had wanted to be a doctor for so long. It wasn't just a job. It was absolutely my identity, my purpose in life. So how do you go about sort of extricating yourself from that? And that is when I came across a Turkish proverb that actually changed my life forever. And it was, no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turn back. And that's what allowed me to walk away from a very long, career and life's work and reinvent myself, change my life. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a family. None of those things were happening. I was getting on in my mid to late 30s, and I managed to change all of that and meet my husband, who of course ended up being a doctor, and get married and have my beautiful daughter and really reinvent my life and find my way back to medicine in a very different way, because I had always wanted to help people. I had always been very fascinated with the human body and with medicine. And I think that stemmed also from, as a young child, having a lot of medical issues myself, which was good and bad, because I think it inspired me to become a doctor, but it also created a lot of medical trauma in me that was re-triggered when I was training to be a physician. And nobody really addressed that or recognized that. And I think that also contributed to my burnout in the end. But I eventually came back to medicine and reinvented my career and found a new way to practice and to do functional medicine and to create a life for myself that was not taking a massive toll on my physical and mental health every single day.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And there are so many things in what you were just sharing with us where I'm just nodding along and thinking of myself and others whom I know, that these experiences are unfortunately so common that, like you said, we often don't even realize that burnout is sneaking up. And also in many places, burnout is kind of worn like a badge of honor. It shows that you've been
Yes.
busy doing things, you've been hustling, you've been chasing after things, and it's almost become this sort of expectation. And I don't know if it's just for women, especially because we often have to handle so many more things when it comes to having a family and all those things. But it's almost expected that at some point you're going to hit burnout and it's just normal and you should just get over it. And that's the part that's really scary to me, is that has almost become normal in a lot of workplaces and a lot of places with really high pressure and high stress. So thank you for pointing that out because
yeah. No, I think it's a combination of the normalization of the, hustle culture, which I think we're coming out of. I think these current and future generations have a different approach. And, they can often be criticized as not working as hard, but I actually applaud them for, prioritizing their mental and physical health. Because you know what? If you don't recognize the signs and symptoms of chronic stress and burnout, your body eventually will send you a check engine light. And then if you don't, eventually the car is just going to break down on the highway. And we don't want that. Like I knew and I could sense and feel in my body just the amount of stress and anxiety I was experiencing. I said, I don't want to get some sort of a chronic illness or have a heart attack or, God forbid, get something really serious happen to me, because I could feel it in my bones that this was not healthy. This was not a healthy way to live. The sleep deprivation, the chronic stress, the chronic anxiety, waking up in a cold sweater and a panic every day, like this is not sustainable. But it is normalized. And I think there's a certain stigma attached to admitting, when everyone around you seems to be coping, that like, hey, I'm not coping with this. It's not working for me. And it's not because I'm weak. It's not because I'm lazy, but those messages get broadcast to us. And so we think, well, I can't let on. I can't tell anybody that this is my job is killing me. I have to just keep at it. And there's often a lack of support from managers or bosses or HR. I mean, it really depends on where you work and what the culture is like and what supports are in place and what resources are available. People are often very stigmatized to seek outside help from a therapist or a counselor or a physician or a coach, but that can be really life-changing and life-saving as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there is, I think, still that stigma, like you said, that there's a laziness to it if you actually pull the brakes and start taking care of yourself. And I have a feeling this understanding is starting to change a little bit now, because so many people are experiencing really chronic stress and burnout, but it's still not really to the point where it's a normal thing that we take care of ourselves first before we keep pouring from an empty cup.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
yeah.
Yes, I often use that analogy, but I think that the pandemic, as awful as it was, and as traumatizing as it was for all of us, and I think we are all suffering from collective trauma from that still, that has not fully been addressed or healed. We're just expected to carry on with our lives. But that was very traumatic for us and for our children and for all the people that we lost. And it did shine a very bright light on burnout and how we were expected to do the impossible. I mean, you're supposed to be surviving during a global pandemic, not dying, taking care of your family, homeschooling your child, working full time, working remotely, running around Zoom meetings, and kids are screaming, and you're supposed to stick them on a computer. I mean, that didn't work. I had a very young child during the pandemic. She had just started first grade. So I had to basically, homeschool her. It was crazy. But I think that that did highlight for people that, you know what? We need to do things differently and we need to rethink things, and especially, my goodness, for all of my healthcare worker colleagues and friends. And like, we didn't sign up to put our lives on the line for this job. It's like, yes, I love my job. I care about my job, but the job they weren't protecting people. And for the rest of us, it was like, well, yeah, I mean, do we have to do a long commute every day and go to this office and be under fluorescent lights and, in an environment that maybe is not conducive to creativity or work? Or can we do some teleworking and some working from home and some flexibility, some flexible hours whereby maybe you do take some time during the day to be with your kids, and then you work maybe a little bit in the evening or a little bit on the weekend, or, have a little bit more of work life balance, which is always a tricky thing to achieve. I don't even know that it exists, or work life integration, where you're able to seamlessly kind of go back and forth while at the same time not allowing your work to bleed into your life completely. It's kind of pros and cons to it. But I mean, we carry our home offices, our office with us all the time in the form of our phones. And it just didn't used to be like that. You used to be able to clock out, and that was that. I mean, yes, in my day, we did have pagers, which was terrible, but
I
and
remember those.
necessary, but yes, and the pagers. But you could basically, like, just disconnect and reconnect with the outside world, with yourself, with your family, with your friends, and not be so tied to this device that is like sending you alerts constantly, that's sending you constant texts and emails and bombarding you. And then we feel this obligation that we have to respond in the moment. But that is also manufactured. And there's nothing that says you have to respond immediately to every notification you get, because, you're like a hamster on a wheel at that point. And so, yeah, I think you have to set some boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of some real conversations. Nothing against Zoom, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for
Right,
technology.
right.
But it's really nice to sit down with someone and actually get a hug, or, watch their face sit across from them and actually share their energy in a way. And a lot of those parts, I feel like they've kind of, especially during the pandemic, of course, really kind of fallen by the wayside. So all of that, I think, contributes to stress and burnout, because those support systems aren't exactly there in the way that they used to be. So yeah, there's a lot of changes that we went through
Absolutely.
and had to adjust to.
Yeah. And I think we have to do the work now to really restore all of these institutions and support systems. And we know, I mean, the research shows that when you look at societies and cultures in something called the blue zones, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but yeah, so it's like these areas in the world that are very special, and, they have the highest concentration of centenarians. So people who live to be 100 and beyond, but in good health, not, in a nursing home or whatnot. And there's so many factors that contribute, but they found sort of universal factors. And one of them is having a close-knit community of friends that you hang out with and that you see regularly. I'm trying to form my girl group here, of like, and we're scattered, because it's really hard to have that locally.
Yeah.
It's really tricky, but it's so important. Isolation, loneliness, those are also forms of stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of us don't really think of that as stress. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying, that the burnout sneaks up on us, because I think some of the pieces that contribute to burnout, we might not be fully aware that they're happening until we're in this hole, like you kind of described, and you're like, oh, this is it. This is how I'm supposed to feel. Or is this just adulting that's going on? Is this normal? And we don't
Right.
really understand that this is maybe not the way that life is, and it can be so much better, but
It's
we
so hard
don't.
when you're in it. So the analogy that I like to use to help people really get a sense for what this is like is a frog in the water. You went, what is she talking about? So if you take a frog and you place it in a pot of boiling water, what is the frog going to do? Well, it's going to jump out, right? And it's not going to want to be in boiling water. It's like, hey, I'm not gonna get cooked here, no frog legs. But if you take the same frog and you put it in a pot of room temperature water and you increase the heat slowly, 1 degree at a time, until you reach boiling point, what's going to happen to that frog? That frog is going to be dinner. because it's not going to notice. It's not going to realize the incremental nature of how it creeps up on us. And I think that part of, my mission and part of the work that I do with patients and clients is getting people to attune to the signs and symptoms in their own bodies of like, hey, this is not okay. Like, I'm not feeling okay. Like, pay attention to those things. Pay attention to not sleeping well. Pay attention to aches and pains. Pay attention to headaches. Pay attention to GI upset. Pay attention to your heart, beating too fast or feeling a little jittery. And, maybe it's too much coffee. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's burnout. There's so many, warning signs that we're getting, but we're just ignoring them. We're just having another cup of coffee or taking a medication or taking a Tylenol or something. And like, oh, I'm fine. I'm just going to keep going. But, and people come to me and they say, how can you help me become more tolerant to stress? And I say, well, actually, I'm going to help you do the opposite. I'm going to help you become less tolerant to stress so that you learn to recognize it earlier, you learn to manage it. And I'm also going to give you tools so that you are able to handle it better and be more resilient and not have it take such a toll on you. But I don't want you to get used to it and be boiling water.
Yeah, that makes sense. We often talk about having to increase our capacity or window of tolerance, but as you put that, we might not actually want that. We might to just sit back earlier and actually recognize a lot of the things that are going on. And this is a great point that you're making, because stress is also a very individual experience. So while I feel like we do have a lot of universal things that happen to people, like you mentioned, the aches and pains, the GI upsets, things like that, but they might come at different times for different people because we all have these different capacities, right? So important for each one of us to look at our own body and how we feel in our body, because we'll notice that something is off. There always is that little nagging voice that says, oh, that wasn't there before. Oh, you didn't used to feel like that. It's always there, but then we ignore it. So yeah, really, really important to pay attention to our individual bodies and minds and really listen into what's happening to us in order to be able to do that. You mentioned the Turkish proverb of no matter how far you've gone down that road, you can come back. Yeah. And it makes me think of if you don't make time for your health now, you'll make time for your illness later.
100%.
That to me sounds like a lot of that happens with burnout as well. We tend to ignore those little signs that pop up. And at some point, the bottom falls out because we've just let it get to that point.
And, like I said, do what you know. I know this because I ended up with autoimmune disease, despite being very healthy and eating all the kale and exercising and doing all the things. And I had no other medical issues and no family history. Well, what was it? Stress. Extreme amounts of stress and hormonal fluctuations. I had had a baby, and, women are more prone to autoimmune disease and to burnout. And we don't know 100% if it's because there are these hormonal differences and biological and physiological differences, or it's because, as you said, so much more expectation is placed on women. You're supposed to be the mom, run the household, do all the things, and work at the same time. And those same expectations in our society are just not there for men. And it's still shocking that, women are just expected to figure it all out on our own. There's no infrastructure there. There's no support. It's just, well, do all the things.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that it was called like the free second shift, so that women basically work, their regular day job, but then they come home and they almost work another full-time job just with those responsibilities, but they don't get paid. So, yeah.
And then there's something called the mental load, which, if you're not familiar with that, there's an amazing, actually a French comic that was translated into English about the mental load. It's amazing. And it's basically like the woman and the mom is like, has so much in her head that she's keeping track of. And she's trying to make a dinner for the dinner party. She's trying to feed the baby. And then she has to keep track of like, oh, there's a doctor's appointment. Oh, there's school. Oh, I have to make the kids lunch. Oh, I have to remember to feed the cat. Or like we are keeping track of all of these things. And the husband is like relaxing in another room and the dinner's overflowing and it's just a complete disaster. And he said, oh, you should have asked for help. Oh, you should have asked. And she's like, yeah, that's one more thing for me to do and remember. And I'm like, not to throw husbands under the bus here. And I'm sure there are some amazing ones, but it really is this mental load and that women are required to bear. And it takes a toll on us over time. It really does. And we have to kind of stand up and say, you know what, ask for help and just educate the people around us that like, we can't do it all. We can't do it all because eventually we're going to break.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like we stay in those stress responses almost just longer without being able to come out of them because there is so much going on. And even when we're not physically moving, maybe at some point, we are mentally going, 100 miles a minute. And there's still kind of that stress response going on that we can't shift into that more rest and digest mode because all of that is happening. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think for many people, there's also this discipline of like, and this sort of unwillingness to shift almost because you've gotten so accustomed to it. And, I have people, telling me like, well, I'm doing this and this and this and this. And then I sit on this board and I have this job and then I have this other job. And then I've got to do this with my kid and this. And I'm like, well, do you have to do all these things? Like, could you not maybe let go of this? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't let go of this. It's like people are counting on me and I can't disappoint this. And I'm like, well, but what about yourself? And so what I teach and what my fundamental kind of mantra is that is really profound and yet very simple is do one thing less. And it's a concept that people have a hard time wrapping their head around and implementing when they hear it, they're like, oh gosh, that's so easy. It's so simple, because we tend to try to do more and more and more and pack in more and more into our everyday. It's like, well, I have to go do this errand and then I have to pick up the dry cleaning and then I have to go to the grocery store and then pick up the kid and then I have to drop off the pet at the vet or whatever. And it's like, you've got this list and then you're running around. Maybe you get a parking ticket. Maybe you get into a fender bender because it's just too many things. So when I start to feel that, and you can feel it in your body if you pay attention, when I start to feel this like rising up, I sort of say to myself, okay, let's get real. Because I have to practice what I preach. I'm like, you've got this today. Like, what can I cross off my list? What is something that is not essential? Delete, delay, delegate. Like, do I need to do this at all? Can I do this another day? That's not so crazy. Do I say, oh, you know what? I actually have enough food at home that I can make dinner tonight. I don't have to go shopping today. Or, and prioritizing the things that really do matter to you. But it is hard for people to do. It's simple, but it's not easy.
When you actually said that, I had a little anxiety skip in my breath. So as I was thinking of what I need to get done today and tomorrow, and you said do one thing less, I was like, can I do that? So I understand. I think for a lot of people that will trigger that, oh, well, if I don't get it all done, will I get judged by the other moms, my family?
It triggers the performance anxiety, the perfectionism, the belief that we have endless capacity to do things. Well, I can do it. I'm Superwoman. I can do all the things, And I think you learn over time, especially if you have struggled with mental and physical illness, that you just cannot. And eventually your body will say, nope, no, thank you. And so in order to prevent that from happening, we have to really kind of decrease the amount of burden and pressure and stress that's placed on us. And that can start in a really simple way by just crossing one thing off your list. And the feeling of spaciousness and relief that you're going to have is like, oh gosh, wow, I don't have to rush from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. There can be a pause where I don't have something scheduled. And that pause can allow you to reflect, to create, to be intentional, to plan, to dream, to really make the space to prioritize what is important and perhaps be even more productive and even more successful. So it's counterintuitive because people are like, but I'm doing less, so it must be bad. But we know that interruptions decrease productivity by a huge percentage. Every interruption, every email, every text, every ping, every ding really derails us and takes us off course. If you can just put all that aside. And the other analogy, of course, that I talk about in my TED Talk is clearing a table of dishes. And you're trying to clear the table and you've got all the plates stacked up and things are balanced kind of precariously, and like you've managed to clear almost everything, but there's like one pesky cup still left on the table. And what are you going to do with that? Well, of course, everyone's like, well, of course, I'm going to pick it up and add it to the pile, which is going to result in everything crashing down. And next thing you know, you're spending all this time sweeping up broken glass. And you haven't saved any time. You've actually created more work for yourself. And by just doing one thing less, AKA leaving that cup on the table, you've created that space. You can complete the task. Might take you a second longer, but you haven't completely overwhelmed the system and derailed things. And so, it's a little bit easier said than done, but it's also pretty simple. And I know that we can do it.
Yeah, this is actually a really excellent place for our listeners to start. I think whether you are in burnout or you think you're getting close to it, this is a good way to look at the day regardless, just so you can free up some more space for yourself and for you to breathe into and maybe do something that actually supports your own well-being as well. So
Yes.
fantastic place for listeners to take a first step and maybe have a look at the day and go, okay, maybe there are a couple of things that I added in there because I thought I needed to, but they're not crucial. Nothing's going to fall apart if I don't do them, and maybe do them the week after or some other time where you do have some space. So yeah, this is a great starting place. Anything else that you would recommend to our listeners if they feel like they've been maybe skirting burnout, they're feeling some signs in their bodies, they're feeling some mental challenges maybe, and they're thinking that they could be in burnout? Where should they start when they're feeling that there are changes going on?
Yeah, well, start with the basics first of all. So make sure you're getting sleep. I know that sounds really, simplistic, but if you're not getting adequate sleep that's restful and restorative, all bets are off for everything else. I mean, you're not allowed to then have energy, or your body is not allowed to repair itself if you're not getting adequate sleep. So sleep is the foundation for everything. So, but if you are getting good sleep, then take a look at your diet and what are you eating? And are you eating fast junk food, like on the run of like, oh, I'm just going to grab a cookie or a donut, or I'll grab some fast food for lunch because I don't eat it at my desk because I'm so busy. Really reevaluate what you're eating and what you're putting in your body, because that is the fuel, that is the gasoline. And you may inadvertently be putting stressors into your body if you are eating food that is not well tolerated. If you have food intolerances or sensitivities that you're maybe not even aware of, that is a constant stress on your body as well. So I would look at sleep, I would look at food, I would take a look at the different areas of stress in your life. And that's usually job, family, environment, financial stress, and just think like, relationship stress, obviously. Think, where in all of that can I move the needle a little bit? Do I have a stressful commute? Could I take the train instead of driving? Would that be less stressful? And then I could get some work done and read on the train and not be stuck in traffic and screaming at people, just simple things like that. Or can I outsource something? Can I, have my husband cook one night a week or, just something like that. And then if those things are still not moving the needle, I would also recommend mindfulness, breathing, meditation, like those kinds of techniques to really ground yourself, slow down the nervous system, move more into a parasympathetic mode that we sort of talked about, the rest and digest mode, which is the opposite of the fight or flight mode, which is what we're in most of the time when we're constantly chasing, deadlines and things. And then obviously go see a professional, go see your regular doctor, get a checkup, make sure everything is actually okay, that there's not something medical going on, because there can be so many factors that can feel like burnout. You could have a thyroid issue, you could have a cortisol issue, you could have a cardiac issue. There's so many different actual medical things that can cause feelings of stress and burnout and whatnot. And then, obviously your mental health is extremely important, and taking care of that and seeking help, finding a counselor, finding someone to talk to, finding that support in addition to, your friends and family and whatnot. But it's to have an outside voice that is solely there to support you and that is a professional and can help you. I think that that's hugely beneficial. And of course, see a functional medicine doctor like myself, because what we do is we really go beyond the surface level of, well, here are some symptoms, here's a medication, and we try to dig really deep and get at the root cause of what is causing these symptoms in this particular individual. So I look at everything from diet to environmental exposures to, specific blood work, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, hormonal imbalances. I look at the gut and gut health and the microbiome and how that could be possibly impacting things. And we take a sort of a different lens analysis of lab testing and going really deep and really trying to find a personalized plan for the individual and not just kind of a standard blanket process. So yeah, that's kind of would be where I would start. But I mean, yeah, the easy thing to do is start by doing one thing less and take it from there. It starts with small steps, and we may think, oh, well, that's not going to make a difference. It's like, oh, but you have to start somewhere. And the more you learn to reduce stress and create boundaries, the better you get at it, and the more you're able to do less.
Yeah, absolutely. And those small steps are so important. I feel like I've gone through burnout a few times as well. And I always felt like during those times, like somehow I was losing control over my mind, my body. But taking those little steps was actually a way to take back that control and be able to center back into myself and actually take a look at what was going on. So I think these tiny steps are so important in moving forward and in taking care of ourselves and coming back to ourselves to find out how we can move forward. So yeah, that's a great place to start, is take those baby steps.
And just so I didn't mention exercise. So a word about exercise, like a movement, I like to call it movement with my patients because exercise can feel a little daunting. But so that is a double-edged sword when it comes to burnout. So you have to be careful with the type of exercise that you're doing and the amount of exercise that you're doing. And I think a lot of people use exercise as a means of coping with stress, but it can actually perpetuate stress in your body, especially if you're doing a lot of hardcore cardio, especially depending on the stage of life that you're at. If you're a woman, perimenopause, doing a lot of cardio, you are increasing your cortisol levels. You might find it harder to lose weight. You might find more stress and anxiety and more difficulty sleeping. So I recommend lower levels of exercise, walking, yoga, swimming. Sure, weights, very important, but not overdoing it. And overburdening yourself and pushing yourself too hard. Like, oh, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, I'm going to train for a marathon. That's a pretty terrible idea. So, you know.
Good thing that you're mentioning that. Yes, that's actually exactly what happened to me, because I was told
Oh my goodness.
if I was in perimenopause, and I did put on quite a bit of extra weight, and I was told, oh, you just need to move more and exercise it off. And I
Oh my
finally
God.
clued in that actually was part of the problem. So switched to yoga and a lot of those more mindful movement things, and so much better. So thank you for pointing that out, because
Yes,
many
yes.
people get told that their problem is just that they're too lazy and they're not moving enough.
Oh, yeah, that is, yeah. Eat less, move more. We
Yeah.
know that that does not work, especially in perimenopause.
Yeah. And you will find out the hard way if you
Yes,
don't take
yes.
that into consideration. So yeah,
Oh
that's
my
an
goodness.
excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. There's many things that go into our stress and into our healing. So all these little bits come together to kind of form our own unique
It's
healing
so
journey.
complex, you know, when I was preparing for various talks and researching this topic in depth, like there are so many factors that contribute. You know, you might think, well, why me? You know, why am I burned out and other people are not? Well, there's so many factors that are possibly even beyond your control, like being female, being a perfectionist, or having those tendencies. They do put you at increased risk. Now, one that I didn't even realize was a history of childhood trauma puts you at increased risk for burnout. So that was like a light bulb moment for me. Like, wow, I didn't even know that. And I had no clue that that put you at increased risk for burnout. And it's just something to be aware of and something to look out for. If you know that you have these, you know, these risk factors in a sense, to look for them and to pay more attention and to maybe, you know, take care of yourself a little bit more, put in that extra effort to recognize burnout and realize that you are at increased risk. And once you've burned out once, like I feel like that tendency is there. And I have burned out again several times, you know, in parenting, in the pandemic, and now, you know, balancing being part of the sandwich generation of like aging parents and young kids. And like that is really another way to burn out for sure. And so we just have to be mindful. We can't always change our circumstances. And sometimes there's going to be a season of life where things are just really, really hard, like being in medical school or having a newborn or, you know, like even good stress, like getting a promotion or getting married. Those are all like seasons of life. And yes, there can be increased stress and we can feel it, and that's okay. I'm not saying, oh, we need to get rid of stress altogether. Stress can actually be productive. It's that inverted U curve. um, but you just have to be aware that it doesn't become your new normal.
Yeah. And especially utilizing some of the tools that you mentioned also to step in when you're starting to feel those changes, or like you said, that rising feeling. I'm sure that many of our listeners are very familiar when they feel that coming on, to actually look into that toolbox
Yes,
and
and
take some of those tools.
find what works for you. You know, some
Yeah.
people don't like a meditation, but they like walking, you know, and whatever gentle form of exercise works for you, whether, and maybe there's like a creative outlet that works for you. Maybe it's knitting, maybe it's watercolor, maybe it's baking or tinkering in the garage, whatever works for you. If you can find something that fuels you and that helps restore, you know, your sense of calm and peace and self, then do that thing, you know, find that thing and try to practice it.
Yeah.
Music's a great
Yes.
one for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. For you. Music, yes. Yeah, but music is absolutely fantastic also for healing and all sorts
Yeah.
of really
Yeah.
great things. So yeah. Now, if our listeners are curious, because I think we've touched on some really interesting pieces in and around burnout today. So how can our listeners get in touch with you? How can they work with you? And what do you have available to offer people who are more curious about this topic?
Sure. Yeah. There's so many ways we could connect. I love to connect with folks. I always respond to comments and emails. So you can head over to my website, which is drzarya.com. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Zarya Rubin. You can download your free guide, which is the Burnout Toolkit. That's on my website and on my Instagram. So that's free. And it's got a lot of the tips that we talked about, plus some others that we didn't even get to. And it's all very practical and useful. And then I do offer one-on-one functional medicine consultation and work if people are really struggling and they have a combination of medical issues and stress and burnout, and they're not sure how it's all interconnected or where to even start putting the pieces together or unraveling the puzzle and the ball of yarn, then I do offer one-on-one consultation. So you can find that on my website, all the information about that as well. I also have a free women's support group on Facebook that's called Outsmart Burnout. So lots of ways to connect, and I love connecting with folks. I'm happy to answer questions anytime.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And of course, we will be linking to also your TED Talk that you gave and the book that you co-authored so that people have even more resources available for connecting with you and learning a bit more about burnout also.
Yes, wonderful. I would love for folks to watch and share my TED Talk. It was a real joy. It was, one of my goals in life was to give a TED Talk, and it was in April, and it is on burnout. And we touch on a lot of the themes from today. And yes, the book is on thriving after burnout. It's all true stories of women physicians who struggled with burnout, because burnout in physicians and healthcare workers is so common. And so that was a really wonderful book to be a part of. You can get it on Amazon. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all this stuff and for the great conversation we had today. It was really, really flowed. It was really, really depthful.
Absolutely. I am so glad that we got this opportunity. And I feel like we actually talked a lot about things that people are experiencing globally everywhere, especially women also that I know. And so thank you for bringing your wisdom and all this experience that you have on this topic and functional medicine to today's episode. I truly appreciate that you took the time to come here and share this with us today. And I'm sure our listeners found so much value in that. And I have a feeling that they probably recognized a lot of the things that we spoke about probably in their own lives. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're so welcome. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, I hope we get to do this again. I feel like we still have many more things to talk about when it comes to burnout, a few more of the techniques and things that we can do.
Of course, absolutely. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Zarya, and take really good care of yourself.
You're so welcome. Merci. Au revoir.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.